Any second?
Second.
It has been moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Chair's report. I'm acting as the vice chair. I'm the vice chair, but I'm acting as the chair today. And I would like to welcome all of you to our PRC meeting and Happy New Year to you all. Okay. Our PRC officer report.
Okay. We have had no new cases filed since the last meeting. There are 2 cases on for administrative closure in closed session later this evening. We have scheduled a board of inquiry for the one active case. It's scheduled for January 31st, and I thank Commissioners Lethwich, Allenby, I believe, and Chang for serving on that BOI. I should let you know that on the last, I think I let you know, I should let the public know, in our December agenda, we were supposed to go into closed session to consider a late filed complaint. It was postponed because the complainant did not file his late filed form. So we gave him until last week to file the form, and he did not, so staff rejected the complaint as entitled. I wanted to remind commissioners about the commissioners' information session, the strategic plan. I handed out this flyer at the last meeting, and it's coming up next Thursday, January 16th at 6:30 at 2180 Millville, that's City Hall. And you are asked to RSVP so they know how many people to expect.
An extra one of those, Kathy?
Pardon me?
Give an extra?
Oh, yes. That's good. This is
Thank you.
And if anybody else needs that information, just give me a call. Okay. Commissioner Mickelton's entered the room. One of the things that I handed out was a copy of the Berkeley site article that was published on December 19th. This, it talked about our board of inquiries and allegations and findings. To my chagrin, but to Ms. Raguso's credit, she noticed there was an error in the annual report. So in the beginning of the report, in the executive summary, I had stated that there was one colloca appeal that had been appealed and then upheld, but it was overturned. So I will be making that correction to the report on the website. Just want to draw Commissioners' attention to the meeting schedule on page 17 of your packet. There's 2 different versions of the schedule, for you to pull out and stick on your fridge or whatever to help you remember. And there's another handout called Police Review Commission Commendations, and that's for a later agenda item, so that's a 1-page thing that I handed out. And then the last thing is the packet of materials regarding the use of force special order that the chief had just issued. And so this is simply a hard copy of what I had forwarded you by email earlier. And this will be considered by, and other materials will be considered by the use of force subcommittee when we can get a meeting going. Chair Perez-Velez is about to embark on a new job, and so his schedule is a little up in the air right now. So that's why I haven't even begun the process of trying to schedule a use of force subcommittee, and that's Commissioners Perez-Velez, Lethwich, and Chang. And then the MOU compendium subcommittee also needs to meet, and Commissioner Perez-Velez is on that. That's Commissioners Mickelton, Allenby in addition to him. So,
So who's
Georgia. Yeah, so that's why I can't schedule anything until he figures out what his availability is going to be. So. And then, Lexipol is gonna be on hiatus for just a little bit, for a couple reasons. The full commission is behind as far as what the subcommittee has looked at, so there's several, I don't know how many, maybe a dozen, that are waiting to go to you beyond what's coming to you tonight. And then, Commissioner Carrizales is on that subcommittee as well, so we just thought it would be a good time to just take a little bit of a break for at least a month, maybe, on that subcommittee. And that is it for me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chief of Police report?
I don't have anything from the chief. I just found out a couple hours ago he wasn't gonna be here and he
Okay.
didn't relay any message.
Okay, thank you. Subcommittee reports. Lexipol subcommittee?
I think I just basically.
Okay, so we'll pass over it. Well, we can pass over all of them because you mentioned them all.
Yeah,
Oh, you-
standard
yeah.
approved, still waiting. Oh, actually, the standard approved subcommittee, that reminds me, there is one more thing I should report, which is, you know, at the last meeting, I was asked about leaving for, and all I could tell you was that it was ongoing, and I can tell you that it is still ongoing. They're very actively, meeting in good faith and spending a lot of time, trying to come up with something that everybody should be happy with, so. I know that, I believe they may be going to closed session on January 21st on the charter, proposed charter amendment. So.
I just would say with respect to the standard approved subcommittee, that was obviously put in place in case we needed to take action as a commission ourselves, because we're authorized to do that without, a charter amendment or an ordinance. And we are getting close, somewhat close to the period where there may not be able to be a charter amendment placed on the ballot. Clearly not before March, but even by November. And I guess if we were getting close to that, then I would wanna agendize something to activate the committee and do whatever we're gonna do.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. Old business, we're going to move that to the January 22nd meeting,
As well as.
9B. Item B, disbanding the probation and parole search subcommittee.
Mhm.
And under 9C, PRC Officer Lee will
Okay.
discuss this.
So, commissioners need to consult their November packets. Page 13. And for the public, the prior packets are in the public binder, if anybody wants to look at that. We're actually looking at page 13, 11. I know I wrote 13, but I realized I should have said 11. So, this is, something that's just been kind of hanging around for a while, and it first arose at a time when the commission, had a lot of things on its plate, could never get through its agenda, and so placed on the back burner for quite some time. And, so it's finally able to bring it to you, of course, now it's been on your back burner, this commission's back burner for several meetings now. This situation arose, we'll call them informal complaints,
I'm sorry, which packet?
of the November packet.
November 13th.
November 13th? No, there's only one.
This is the packet.
On
Yeah,
page
November
11.
13th.
This is the,
That's what it looks like.
you're talking about the memo from you,
Yes, October 3rd, 2019 memo?
yes.
What page is that?
It's page 11 of the November 13th packet. So, an informal complaint is something that we defined as a complaint against a specific officer or officers, but it's not filed on our complaint form. So that's, we call that a formal complaint, and that triggers the whole process, that there are rules and regulations about. Informal complaints, come by mail or email, and we generally would, the way we are handling them now and have historically is to let the person know that there is a formal complaint process, both for individual complaints and a policy complaint process as well, to review general policy and procedure. This issue arose, and what we were doing in the past was putting any complaints in your packet, just as a communication to the commission to see what was the public concerned about in terms of BPD's actions. But there was a point where I inserted an informal complaint in the packet. It had a specific officer's name on it, and the city attorney informed me, actually I think the union had complained and the city attorney looked into it, and we were informed that even an informal complaint, if it names a specific officer, has to be treated as confidential under the same rules that apply to formal complaints. So under the penal code 830, 835, 837. So, and so the city attorney's memo is in the packet and just basically goes through all the legal reasoning for why this is. And then the deputy city attorney who wrote this talked about how can we handle them in the future. So back in February of 2017, the commission did, at that time, propose an amendment to the regulations. And I guess this must have been a time staff was busy and I hadn't brought it back. So on page 13 of this packet, are two proposed amendments to our regulations. The first one is more closely hews to what the commission wanted. The second one is something that staff's recommending. I would say the main difference, I think paragraph 1 is the same. The main difference is that instead of agendizing every single one, for the commission to advise the staff what to do, Byron and I discussed this and thought, it just makes more sense for us to do what we've been doing, and you'll still know about everything we're doing, which is on the second recommendation under B2, PRC staff shall contact the complainant to explain the policy complaint and formal individual complaint processes. And then we will agendize them for closed session. And at that point, I guess what this doesn't say is what you could do, but that's pretty open-ended. So we would definitely, report to you as what's going on, and then you might have some advice about further steps that we would take. But to us, this seemed more efficient than bringing it to you to closed session, where you would probably say, well, contact the complainant and let them know what their options are. So that is what's before you, is how to amend our regulations. And I can say that there really haven't been, although it's been some time since it's come back to you, we've maybe had 3 or so informal complaints sent to us.
So it feels a little incomplete since it's left hanging that they'll be agendized. And then there's no discussion at all. I mean, I think since I've been on the commission, we haven't had any.
No.
So what was done in the past with them? I mean, it seems like there ought to be something here about what happens next.
Right. Well, usually, if it turned into a formal complaint, then you would see
Right,
it.
well, that's different, yeah.
So that, right. And so if it didn't, I guess then you wouldn't see it.
And we
Because
wouldn't
what would
do-
happen in the past. You just wouldn't know about it, because the we would let the complainant know, here's what you can do.
Right.
And they could either choose to go through the formal route or not, but if they didn't, then you never saw it. So this way you'll at least see everything.
Right,
that
but I'm
comes
just
to
saying,
us.
after we see it,
Uh-huh,
in the
right.
past, what did the commission do in response? Anything?
But you didn't see it in the past.
Oh, I thought you said it was included in our packets in the past.
No. Oh, in the oh, yes, before we had to,
Yeah.
before we had to
Yeah.
not do.
So I think
You
you're
would
just
usually
saying,
say
add
as-
something,
I'm
add
just-
another.
Well, usually, we would already have contacted the person and could report to you what they said about how to proceed.
Right, but assuming they don't wanna lodge a formal complaint,
Right,
then we do nothing.
Then-
Is that,
right,
okay,
we don't
all right.
yeah,
So it's just FYI, these informal
It's
complaints,
just-
so we're not gonna act on them.
right,
Okay.
right,
We could advise you to,
sure. Yeah.
So the only question is if it's worth adding a number 4 that just
Mm-hmm,
spells out what could happen.
you could do that too.
there's a sentence we could just lift from the middle of number 2. The commissioners shall consider the informal complaint and recommend what action, if any, the PRC officer should take.
And then not the next sentence, cause that's.
Except the
Right.
next sentence is already down here.
Right,
about
so
the
just
formal.
lift that middle sentence and put it at the end of number 3.
Okay, or what, maybe what additional action? Because,
Right,
yeah,
yes.
okay, I would be okay with that.
You put it under 4, make it 4.
Right.
You're editing the top. Are you editing the first proposal?
No, we're editing, okay, let me make clear. I think we're editing the second, the alternate proposal, but we're adding a number 4 that takes from, the one above. So it will read, the commissioners shall consider the informal complaint and recommend what additional action, if any, the PRC officer should take.
Correct.
Okay. Any
Are we
other
ready for a motion?
thoughts?
I will make a motion to accept the staff recommendation with the addition of number 4.
Seconded.
Okay.
Okay, who's second? I heard.
Commissioner
Couple people.
Cowley.
Ramsey?
Okay.
Okay. It has been moved in second, all in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Okay. Item number 9D, it's in your packet.
Right, so there's Commissioner Perez-Vales's, proposal is in this week's packet, it's on page 15.
It's basically a return to what the PRC used to do.
Exactly, if that, anybody who's familiar with the process knows that it was, when I read it, I realized, it sounded, when he handed it to me, he said, okay, great. When I read it, I said, it's the same thing, which is what I thought some commissioners wanted to get away from. So, the handout is something that, Byron had put together just as a whole set of ideas. And, he and I have discussed different, ways to approach the topic of commendations. So, he's broken it down into what kinds of things are we gonna acknowledge: outstanding service, valor, years of service.
What page is that?
It's not in the, it's in the.
Oh, it's
Yeah, it's the second page behind the birthday celebration.
okay.
It's not in the statement. And then, recipients could be specific officers or employees of the department, team or division, or the whole department. A commendation could come from letters or testimonials from members of the public, which is what we do now, what you do now.
Did she get a copy? Oh, you do? Okay.
Too much paper.
Sorry, I know, I apologize. So, does everybody have this? Okay. And, so I'm going over the basis for the recommendations. So right now, you just look at letters or testimonials from members of the public. An idea, again, these are just a whole bunch of different ideas. So an idea is, recommendation for accommodation could come from commissioners, or, the chief or senior staff could say to the commission, we think we should recognize so and so. And then, in terms of what kinds of awards you would give, or how you would recognize a person, right now we do, you know, we recognize, you guys recognize an officer or employee, and it's, ends up as a letter in our personnel file. We've identified other sorts of things you can do, certificates, ribbons, plaques, letting the council or mayor know. And then, in terms of the process, the first bullet is pretty much what you do now. Second bullet is a little more involved, establishing a subcommittee. And, third bullet is to participate in some existing, award ceremony, and existing award ceremony.
So that doesn't happen currently?
So, no.
Oh.
Well, there is an award ceremony, but we don't have any role in it,
Uh-huh.
so, yeah. So as Commissioner Mickelton pointed out, Commissioner Perez-Velez's proposal was pretty much what's being done now, and before Commissioner Roberts left the commission, he expressed some desire to revamp this, the whole process. So, being that this second piece of paper has just been handed out to you know, you can discuss it now, or start a discussion and continue later, or just put the whole thing on, up to you.
The process just veered a little bit in the interim, and I think it wasn't working for Terry. I see no problem with returning to the way it was done historically. It seemed to go fine. I just have one question, which is, if a member of the public writes a letter, does that in itself constitute a commendation?
I think it goes in the file. Lieutenant?
What's the question?
If the member of the public writes a letter saying,
To the police department?
yeah,
Yeah, that would, could get forwarded to.
So that's essentially a commendation.
Yeah.
Which I would hope that a member of the public would be equally able to commend the police officer.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Those
Yeah.
get those regularly.
That's what we're gonna be reviewing tonight, and voting on. We've been holding on for.
right, well, you know, this is really something that Charlie Roberts wanted to revisit, which was this whole method of doing it.
It was just because of some dynamics in the meeting, really, I think.
Yeah.
The original process was fine.
You think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Ramsey has had his hand up for a while.
Well, I would not be opposed, I'd actually be for kind of revamping the policy as I've seen it. I understand what Charles has said earlier in his public comment, that one approach could be that you're just trying to give accommodation for any sort of conduct that you would want to see by the police department or police officers. But I don't really see that as sort of being the sort of purpose of these as a full commission to be sort of involved in those sort of day-to-day encouragement for officers. I sort of think of we're more on a broader note of general policy, but I see a role for commendations, but to me it really should be for exceptional service. And I really, in my experience from the things we've seen, it's essentially if someone writes a email to the police and says that they had a positive interaction with the police, that all of a sudden becomes, somehow meeting the criteria for a commendation. And to me, that dilutes the meaning of a commendation from the Police Review Commission, and it doesn't really seem to be our role. It's like Commissioner Reed said, if they want to send a letter to the police chief or someone's supervisor or sergeant or area commander, they can do that, and then we put in their file and so forth. But I don't see a reason why we as a commission need to be rubber stamping that essentially. And I think we should be looking for, things that are more unique, that really stand out. These things like valor, years of service, officer, employee, I totally agree with. I haven't thought about it long enough to think about what the articulated criteria to me should be, but I do think it should be exceptional. I don't know what's the difference between exceptional and outstanding, that's in the eye of the beholder. But, maybe there can be some criteria that we can come up with, because I think it just lessens the whole process. To me, it's just pretty much been like a rubber stamp. Someone sees an email from someone and read a recommendation. So I'd prefer to single out those few officers who've really done something unique. And I think that's a role that we could play, or for the last three bullets, because that to me truly is, those three things are unique.
That's a quick question. Would there be maybe some kind of quick discussion or description of the internal Berkeley Police Department commendation process that would be separate from something more, what we're describing as potentially more exceptional from the PRC, which I would assume would require some more vetting by the PRC versus some kind of more employee-related commendation that maybe the Berkeley Police Department would have internally.
So you're wondering what they do now?
Yeah, and what they would do that would make our process different than theirs. Do you have an existing process now for commendation internally?
Yeah, there's a policy, I think it's Lexical 1014, that describes the procedure.
Well, in your packet of the commendations, you'll see some of the, I call them internal commendations, because they're generated by officers, usually supervisors or superiors.
Right.
And those go in the personnel file. Right.
Yeah, they go through, they go to the officer, and the supervisor, they sign it, and they go back and they get put in a file.
So I'm trying to, in terms of what was just raised by the commissioner, trying to see if there's a qualitative difference between that type of internal personnel type of commendation versus what potentially the PRC could do that may or may not be different from that. I don't know.
I may be alone in my thoughts on that.
No, I wanted to echo, I agree with Commissioner Ramsey, absolutely. And the people that I've heard, Terry Roberts before he left, and I think others have mentioned that it will heighten the commendation if it's not a rubber stamp of all the emails that we receive. Now, I don't frankly see anything wrong with what the chair has put forward here as a possible, people have said this is what we already do, but I think the difference might be that what we already do, it seems to me, is accept all of them and just say, okay, we do a comment. But what George is saying here, I think, is that we see the emails or the letters or whatever we get, and we single out some for special commendation instead of rubber stamping the
Right.
set. And I would add that I think any commissioner ought to also put in the mix an officer they'd like to see. I mean, it doesn't have to be emails from the public. It could be, I mean, frankly, I think the incident that we had, when was it, in December, where the Cal football player, you know, that whole incident was resolved without anybody getting hurt. That, to me, was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And even if we didn't receive an email from somebody in the public, we could make a commendation on that.
Mhm.
So we could individually, as commissioners, suggest officers to recognize, as well as seeing the ones from the public. And then, with an understanding that it shouldn't just be rubber stamping the whole set, select those we consider extraordinary. So I think the basic proposal here is fine. It's just that we need to be more, and sometimes there wouldn't be anyone in a set that seemed extraordinary.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is an excellent structure, and it, you know, does give a basis for who could be awarded something. I mean, we'd have to think about whether we're really gonna give all these award types. But my only thing is, I think we have some word that's a little bit more restrictive than outstanding service, because I think outstanding service can
Yes, I agree.
involve, you know, something.
Extraordinary, yeah.
Yeah, extraordinary, and I'd have to look at other things, but to see whether there's some specific criteria, I mean, you know, a little bit more specific, that could at least indicate what may constitute.
You had
I haven't thought about it, but maybe there's, you know, something in the
that merits.
whole policy or something else.
Yeah, you were saying something like more policy oriented. Trying to see if there's like a qualitative difference between what might be maybe, you know, outstanding service, but not extraordinary, but extraordinary in the context of what a police review commission might use to commend
Yeah.
officer conduct.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't given enough thought of, in it or done any research to sort of suggest any criteria, but I do think it would be useful, because I think over time, what then will happen without a stated criteria is
Sure.
words like outstanding and exceptional just become, oh, they send it off, and then people, you know,
Well,
ultimately,
The same, yeah,
just you get towards the same thing if there's not some
I feel like
criteria.
we'll know it when we see it.
I agree with that, but just if you can articulate some criteria, or, you know, the factors that one considers in deciding whether something is exceptional, that can help.
Any other comments, or I'll try to make a motion for us.
Great. Is there any, no comments? Okay, I need a motion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to listen to the language too, but it doesn't seem like we should rush this, don't need to.
It's not too hard, because what you're talking about is how it used to work. And there really just was this interim phase.
Yeah. Well, I've been on the commission for a year and a half, and it's been a year.
It's always been rubber stamping
Total
since I've been
time.
on here.
Yeah, there's a story.
Okay.
Oh,
That's a quick question without.
Yeah.
For the Berkeley Police Department, staff that are here, would you, in terms of some type of qualitative difference between a PRC versus like the Lexipol, like 10.14 or more internal, are there characteristics that you would recommend to us that might indicate something that a PRC might provide someone with extra, if we were to use the term extraordinary kind of conduct of an officer, such as what happened with the football player at Cal, which I think would fall within extraordinary conduct. Is there some type of language or distinction between what's typically provided under 10.14, which I've not read, versus something like maybe along the lines that we're describing extraordinary that you think would be useful?
Yeah, I don't know what verbiage you want to use. It's kind of up to, everybody has their own opinion. Certain things, I mean, me personally, I would agree some of the things that are being rubber stamped, or sometimes just an email saying that the officer was nice to me. Now, not everybody sends those types through, but some do carry like that.
Yeah.
So,
When somebody says like, the officer addressed me,
Yeah.
there's a process internally to address that, right? This is, we're trying to have something a little different. I guess it's a matter of whether or not we want to wait and to add some kind of language versus if we trust ourselves to use what's here already and not turn it back into a rubber stamp practice.
Right.
No.
You know,
I mean, we might see if the chief wants to, if the department wants to.
Really,
take
this is all my fault. Seriously, I can explain it if you wanna know how this came about. It is. So when I sat out there as a member of the public, I watched the commendation process. And what I noticed was that there were PRC members who would sit there like this and refuse to earmark anything. And I was watching the officers' faces, and I thought, I could see it on their faces, that this was an insult and a slap in the face. And I thought, no. You wanna be passive aggressive? I'll make a motion to approve them all, and then you're gonna have to pull them off. So I was interrupting passive aggressive behavior that I thought was contributing to low morale in the police department, which is a serious issue in public safety. So that's how this came about. And,
Sorry, can I?
Well, I totally disagree with your characterization.
well, then I was on when I was on the commission, I made a motion one time to approve them
Oh,
all.
I don't remember.
And then people felt uncomfortable and felt that they were rubber stamping. So there wasn't anything wrong with the,
I'm just gonna say, I've been on the commission long before you, no, not long, but before you were on the commission, and from the first day that they showed up on these things and started running them
We
through,
rubber stamped
it
it.
was rubber stamping, it had nothing to do with your, I don't even think I was here that day,
Well,
that
they
you
used
made
to.
that motion.
But even before
Every
you were on
single-
the commission.
Before you were on the commission,
We just
every
accepted
single one of
all
the first time it was just rubber stamp, it wasn't you at all, it didn't have anything to do with your motion to approve the whole thing. I've always thought, from the first day I saw these things, like, what are we doing this for? And I didn't really verbalize it, because I thought, okay, whatever, this is the process here. I thought it made zero sense, to be
Well, I
honest.
think it was my motion that made Terry uncomfortable.
Okay, maybe Terry, but I never said anything articulated about it, but I sure thought it the entire time.
Terry
The
was
first time that I
uncomfortable.
ever even looked through these things, and the way, and I really didn't say anything because I was new to the commission, and was kind of just trying to say, well, okay, I guess this is the process. But I thought from the very first time, it was, like the lieutenant said, some of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, or the officer was nice to me.
Right.
And I thought, well, what are we doing, commission commendations for that? And now I come at it more from when I was in the military, and the commendations that you got from command staff, I mean, they were for substantive, like exceptional stuff.
Yeah.
To me, that's commendation, not like you did, don't get pat someone on the head for doing what they're supposed to do.
And I think
So,
we're all in agreement.
that's-
So you have some
Right.
language.
I do. So
Yeah.
what I would suggest is that we just add two things to what George wrote. Because I think we're all in agreement that we would like it to be special, and I'm glad to know that, any member of the public can write a letter that goes in the file. Because
Mhm.
we're not the keepers of gratitude in this community. People can express that and it should be received.
Right.
So that's good. So I would suggest that we take George's, 6-step process, and in number 1, where it says, who can make a commendation, we'll add a PRC commissioner. So when an external or internal commendation or testimonial of exemplary service are made by individual members of the community, organizations, a PRC commissioner, or other law enforcement agencies. So Kitty, for example, could propose a commendation for the events in December.
Where's that going in this? 'Cause
Yeah,
I have
number
the
one.
community.
Number 1.
It just
Oh, you know?
includes us in the list of people who could.
We have a version that has bullet points.
No,
Mhm.
no, no,
Just wanna make
Oh,
sure
I
we're
didn't
on the
think
same
George
page.
It's George's proposal.
It's in our packet.
It's in the
It's in the
packet.
packet.
Page
Oh, oh,
15
I
is the
was
packet.
still looking at page 2, sorry.
It's page
I'm
15.
sorry.
Page 15 of today's packet.
I was in the same situation.
Yeah.
Sorry, page 15, okay. And I was talking about the bullet points, so I apologize.
Okay.
Okay, does everyone have it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to finish?
Okay, so we'll add a PRC commissioner in the list of people who can propose
Mhm.
a commendation.
Okay.
And then in number 3, this earmark thing is what you're talking about, Izzy. But we will add a sentence that commissioners may propose a special action or honor for extraordinary service. So,
Where, number 3?
in number 3.
That's a different 3 than I have.
Oh,
Any PRC commissioner
it's the
has the
same.
right to individually earmark and recommend any.
Oh,
yes. So
okay.
commissioners may propose a special action or honor for extraordinary service. So we could use, these types of things that are on this bulleted list.
So Commissioner, you previously used exemplary service. I don't want to be too pedantic here, but do you use exemplary or extraordinary? Is there a thought of that?
Oh, extraordinary.
I think in number 1, frankly, it ought to be extraordinary on the very first sentence. Do you
Okay.
agree with that here,
Extra-
extraordinary?
I think they mean the same thing to me.
Oh,
So
okay.
exemplary, extraordinary,
Mhm.
same thing.
Yeah.
So we want to keep consistency using
Sure.
that term. So we either change that to extraordinary or we keep the exemplary.
I'll
for
change
now.
let's make them both exemplary. Is that okay? Or would you prefer?
Sounds good.
Okay. So that's what I would suggest, make a motion that we accept our chairperson's commendation process.
Okay, so one more time really quickly. Number 1 is exemplary, and then where is the next exemplary going to be? Inserted?
Commissioners may propose a special action or honor for exemplary service.
Okay.
I mean, I'll speak now because it's gonna speak now or forever hold your peace. I prefer Commissioner Calvi is extraordinary.
I do too, but that,
Okay.
it's okay with me.
If you
It's
think
all a
that's
matter of
safe.
how we
Yeah, but I would,
implement
if we're
this,
gonna have a
frankly.
language,
You
I
know.
would prefer extraordinary.
It seems to me extraordinary anyway.
Mhm.
In both places, 1
Yeah,
and
in
3.
both places. Mhm.
That's fine.
Are we in agreement that, that the 2 words basically mean the same thing, but extraordinary has more, just feels like it has more heft? Is
It's
that
more
what-
powerful.
It's more discerning.
Yeah, it's more discerning, I think.
Okay, that's fine. I would agree with that, extraordinary.
Okay.
And the success of this proposal is all in how we implement it, you
Right.
know? We can say what we want, but if we understand, we dilute it.
It's valuable.
So under this, just so I'm clear, this would allow the PRC to come up with its own commendations and/or still be approving of those that are from outside of the PRC.
That's right.
Yes.
You can earmark
Yeah.
So
To
I guess
accent.
to
If it's
get
also
back
with our
to
own
is,
accommodation, it can just be brought, the action is what we're actually evaluating, the action by the officer, not someone else's accommodation. But it can, the action can be brought to our attention by the command staff, someone outside, a community person, or a commissioner individually. But then ultimately, we're gonna be evaluating as a commission whether we have to give accommodation.
but then maybe back to your original point, maybe we should be coming up with some criteria or
For that.
think about it a little more if it's,
Mhm.
because I'm not sure, I'm relatively new to the PRC, so I haven't gone through this before, but it's not clear to me at this point what that would be, what would qualify.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's the lawyerly, approach in this, that we like criteria and tests. Really?
So that would mean that we would have to draft additional language to define it further.
I think
But do you think
that's
think someone
Molehill
feels that way?
Mountain, really.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's frankly outstanding service or extraordinary service, valor, bravery, heroism, all of those.
Mhm.
And I sincerely believe that we'll know it when we see it, and that there's so many idiosyncrasies to what the police do. I think it'd be hard to come up with something that, I don't mean idiosyncrasies, I mean specificities, that it'd be hard to do anything except vague things like extraordinary service. And we have that here.
Yeah.
We could
Do
either,
we wanna have that language?
I
in
don't
there?
think we're gonna be able to quantify.
No, I'm with you, do we wanna put that language in the proposal? It's in the bullets, but it's not in the
I
proposal.
would think so.
So why don't we send this to staff, and we added 2 things to George's 1 through 6, and maybe this, these bullets, these top 4 bullets can be incorporated somewhere, and we'll just
Yeah.
let you.
I'm all for the tough books. I mean, I'd be curious, from the lieutenant. I know it's just kind of putting you on the spot, without any chance to research. Is there something other than these 4 bullets that you think we should be considering?
I can tell you what our policy and accommodations reads
Okay.
if you want that.
Yeah.
Sure, let's all.
The criteria for meritorious or commendable act may include, but is limited to, superior handling of a difficult situation, conspicuous bravery or outstanding performance, any action or performance that is above and beyond typical duties. That's all.
Something like that.
Well, that's helpful.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Oh, beyond this, good language.
Yeah, nice.
You know, I mean, that, and then with years of service and officer employee of the year, I'm all for that.
So would be the 3 bullet points with some language regarding above and beyond. What was the last, what type of service? Regular service.
It's 1014.4 criteria. A meritorious or commendable act may include, but is not limited to, superior handling of a difficult situation, conspicuous bravery or outstanding performance, any action or performance that is above and beyond typical duties.
I'm just wondering, like, so with our bullet points, we have valor, bravery, heroism, years of service, et cetera, and if we somehow kind of captured that in terms of qualitatively with extraordinary in terms of above and beyond something.
Yeah. So let's direct staff to incorporate that the sentiment expressed in the lexical into this 4-point list and see what they come up with. They're smart, creative people.
I would actually propose the first two. I don't think number of years in the department
Right.
qualifies
Yeah.
as extraordinary.
That's fair.
You know, and so I would prefer to limit it to extraordinary service, valor, bravery beyond the typical, you know,
Yeah.
whatever that says. I
I agree
wouldn't
with that.
want
Yeah.
just years of service and
Yeah.
Yeah.
employee of the month.
Now
I
that
would
you
like,
mentioned that, I agree, and all the officer employee of the year too, I mean, that's, you
Yeah.
already have that
that's
conversation.
already, I would limit it to those top two
That's
bullet
fine.
points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then maybe that can be on our next agenda for
Okay, may I point out a couple things? One is, in number 1, it's, at the end, such commendations will be shared by the BPD with the PRC. That's sort of telling us telling the BPD what they should do, which we shouldn't
We
put it
shouldn't
that
do
way.
that, yeah.
Maybe it could be reworded something like, when such commendations are shared, or something like that.
sure.
Okay, so if I could work on that.
Yep.
Okay,
You are
sounds
free to
good.
think and contribute.
Okay. The other is, number 2, on a quarterly basis. I can tell you that historically, the department sends them, semi-annually. So,
That's
it
fine.
doesn't make sense. to-
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I can
Change that.
play with
Yes,
that as
semi,
well.
okay.
Okay.
You could even just say on a periodic basis.
Okay.
Because we might
On a
come
regular
up with
basis.
one
Right,
out of sync where we want to do it.
right. Like the December incident.
Mm-hmm.
Where you don't wanna wait until you get the
Right.
packet. Okay, so these would, and just FYI, my thinking is these would be an amendment to your standing rules so that they would be, you know, memorialized somewhere.
Okay. Sounds good. We leave it in your trusted hands.
Okay. Okay.
Thank
All right,
you.
so just by consensus,
By
that's the
consensus?
process?
Yes.
Okay, aye. Being there. And Catherine said it. Okay, let's get back.
So you're gonna postpone the actual review of the commendations that we got? Until you have this process in place? Because it was also included in your,
It was included in the pad of.
in your November packet, were the actual.
Let's
Did
wait till we
everyone-
get the new policy.
Okay, but I just wanna know, did everyone review them? Was there any that you saw that you might want to move forward now?
It's
Too
been
long ago.
Too
Oh,
long.
so you didn't,
Back.
okay, so
Yeah.
we'll have to postpone it again.
Okay.
Okay, so let's postpone it until our next meeting on the 22nd. Okay. item 10B. Let's go policy.
Oh, 10A, Commissioner Parizella would like to, I should have mentioned this during the approval of the agenda.
Okay.
Commissioner Parizella, in light of the chief's decision to issue a special order instead of an entirely new policy, he would like to withdraw this item from the agenda.
Okay.
And the use of force, as you know, you have a use of force subcommittee, so.
Okay.
Which hasn't met yet.
No,
Okay.
but pending Georgia's
Okay.
schedule, so.
Pending good. And, the special order just came out in January,
Yeah.
a number of days ago.
Mhm. Just a moment.
Okay, so 10B, let's go policy. Has everyone reviewed the policy? Can we, do you want to vote individually or do you want to vote collectively or is there?
Individually.
Okay.
Sorry.
Good for you.
I know.
Okay, well, okay, the first item we're going to review is 327. Is there any concerns about that item?
I just had a few things. One, just to provide some context, I was wondering how often the department either asks for or provides outside assistance. I just wondered what circumstances and how often.
I couldn't give you numbers, but the most recent history, it has to do with the crowd demonstrations and stuff like that. That's been the most frequent thing over the last few years.
Mhm. Okay. And then I see that it says the request for outside assistance shall be made to the Alameda County Sheriff's Department. And I was wondering why it goes to the Sheriff's Department. Again, I don't really understand the circumstances, but say there was some event like on the borderline between Oakland and Berkeley, I would have thought you'd try to seek assistance from Oakland Police Department. But then it sounds like actually the request goes to the Sheriff's Office. I'm just wondering how that
If
works.
it's for a big event, that it's gonna go to the request, but if it's like an emergency situation, we're gonna contact whatever agencies near us for help like right then.
Because I think this says that it always goes to the Sheriff's Department.
Well, there's a difference between mutual aid and mutual assistance. So if we were to require the assistance from OPD in an emergency situation, we would require mutual assistance, which is completely different from mutual aid, which is more like for a pre-planned event, in which case it always goes to the sheriff.
And then who provides the mutual aid if it's somebody from the Sheriff's Office?
They arrange, where they contact other agencies and see how many bodies each place can give up, given the circumstance. Like a lot of times we get some from the county, we'll get some from Oakland, we'll get some from, it depends on the situation, how many bodies we need. And whether that city's already impacted by what the situation is too, like a lot of times they march over to Oakland and, or UC, and so, or like the last few events have been, they call for the mutual aid initially and not us. It's if it's on that, if it starts on their property, but then they're gonna help us if it then goes into our city after it started there.
Okay. I was also wondering, so on page 850, the second to last paragraph, when another law enforcement agency requests unplanned or emergency assistance, I'm just wondering why the word unplanned is in there. What's the distinction between unplanned or emergency?
Some officer makes a stop right on the border and somehow it goes really bad and they need assistance, and we're closer to maybe the rest of the Oakland Police Department if it's on Alcatraz and Sacramento, so they would.
No, but isn't that emergency?
Is there a difference between unplanned or emergency?
It was an event that wasn't planned for, so it happened, and it's beyond their abilities right then.
So it could be unplanned, but it's not necessarily.
It's not an emergency?
Correct. But, well, it needs to be resolved and they need help or they need to cover, and we're the quickest one to get there, or we might be quicker, so they advise us to respond.
They're just trying to capture a number of scenarios there, but if that unplanned would not overlap with mutual assistance, for example, versus mutual aid.
That is the mutual assistance, right?
Correct.
That's the mutual assistance.
Yes, this is the mutual,
Yeah.
this language here would cover mutual assistance essentially.
Okay. The only other thing I noticed is that there was a typo. The word publicly is misspelled about halfway down. A copy of the current compendium is publicly
Which page?
available on page 850.
So
Halfway down.
public, Publically.
So of the sentence before the section assisting outside agencies, there's a sentence, a copy of the current compendium, and publicly is just,
Oh, right.
Additional page. Additional
anyway, that's all I had on it.
Okay, any others? Okay, do we want to vote on this?
All of the total of 327.
327,
Just, yeah,
I need a motion.
So moved.
Any second?
second.
It has been moved in second to accept, let's vote 327, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? Motion carried. Moving to,
Are you the second?
No.
I was the second, okay.
moving to let's vote 343.
I'm sorry.
Has-
Calvino.
Seconder?
Okay.
I was the second, so who was the?
Nick.
Nickerton.
Thank you. Have you read the 343 gun violence restraining orders? Has everyone read it? Are there any concerns?
Yes, I have some.
Okay.
A couple of smaller things and then a bigger thing. Something that I had actually raised the first time around that I still see and I'm wondering about. On page 861 under search warrants, says that the person who has been served with a gun violence restraining order refuses to surrender any firearm and ammunition in compliance with that order, the officer shall consider whether to seek a search warrant. And before I had just raised the issue of why should they be considering it, shouldn't it just be they shall seek a search warrant?
I think they have to still decide whether there's probable cause for a search warrant in a particular area. I mean, there's gotta be some analysis that goes on to whether it's appropriate to seek one from a magistrate.
So even though they've refused to refused to surrender their guns in compliance with an order?
Search warrants, saying you're gonna get a search warrant's a broad thing. I mean, that's, where are you getting, what are you looking for and where are you searching for? So it's not as though you can say, pro se, what search warrant you're gonna look for, where you're gonna do it, et cetera. And it has to be a consideration. I mean, where are you gonna search for the gun? So, that's the first question. What are you searching? What are you searching for? You gotta have probable cause that there's evidence of a crime in a specific location and what that evidence is. So even if they refuse to give it up, you still have to have probable cause about where it's stored. And so if you don't have probable cause about where they took it and where it's resting, you can't just go and ask the magistrate for a search warrant. So there has to be some consideration about whether you're going to request one and whether there's an appropriate basis to get one.
Okay. Okay.
That's how I did that.
Yeah.
I think we discussed it a couple months ago.
Okay. The bigger thing that I came across, because I was looking this law up today, is that there was a new statute adopted in 2019, effective January 1st, that adds a bunch of new requirements. It's Penal Code Section 18108, which says that police departments and other agencies must adopt policies to implement the law by January 21. And it has very detailed requirements about what must be included in the department's policy, including, for example, officers should be instructed to consider a GVRO when responding to a domestic disturbance or cases where the gun owner has mental health issues. So there's a bunch of detailed new state law requirements that I assume weren't taken into consideration, when this was written.
I wouldn't assume that because the way that Lexipol works and the way that the reason that they even got Lexipol was because the Lexipol entity, the company, provides updates to reflect changes in the law. And so assuming that that's a change that's gonna be as of, a certain date, the way Lexipol should work is they should then issue an update to the police department that they will get that will make sure they stay, that they're complying with, any changes to the penal code.
Okay, but given that these things have to be included in any policy by the end of this year, shouldn't we go ahead and have them included?
Yeah, I mean, the
now?
question, I guess, would be twofold. I guess one, whether that is a requirement, I don't know,
Yeah.
trust what you say about the penal code. But then two, whether Lexipol has even issued a further update, which then would be in the normal course of how these things get updated.
I think we can safely approve it, and the Lexipol bulletin
Right.
will capture it, and if there's a revision, then it would come back again. Is that correct, Kathy?
Well, I'm not sure it's gonna come back again, I mean, we're just doing
But
this
if-
round of conversion.
If the law changes and Lexipol issues a bulletin and the police department revises, updates the policy, does
Right.
it come back to the PRC?
Well, that's a good question, I'm not sure.
That's a good question, because these things are changed all the time, right?
Right,
There's always,
right, I mean, if you,
The
I mean, what's in place now is looking at all the new lexical policies, right? Whether they have a counterpart already as a general order or a training bulletin or not.
Yeah, I don't know, but if they're only changing it based on the law, I don't know what the purpose would be to come back and you're gonna be getting them all the time.
Right.
And if it only changes the law, then
understood.
Right, and it's
Yeah.
over our authority.
Yes, so we haven't really, there hasn't, and, I mean, apart from that, there hasn't been a discussion about further changes, after you approve them, what happens when there are other changes. So, and it could change for a number of reasons, because of updates in the law, and probably those would be okay. There could be changes for other reasons, and depending on the reason, you may want to look at them, so but that's a whole other subject to.
The only other thing I wanted to mention about this particular one, so I'm the former legal director of the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, and we worked on this law, I think it was 2014. And I know there have been implementation challenges. And I think I mentioned at one of our earlier meetings, I know there's an attorney who's a fellow, and her entire job is to go around the state and help law enforcement agencies and courts implement this law, because it's not that easy. And so I know that, I don't know, I would imagine that this person would be happy to provide assistance to the Berkeley Police Department on implementation of this. And so I'd be happy to look into that. I guess I'm just hesitant to okay something that just isn't right. I mean, knowing that it's not together and knowing how challenging this area is. But I'm not sure procedurally how, what to do with that.
When does the new law take effect?
It just took effect.
It's already taken effect.
It took effect, but the law enforcement agencies have to come up with their new policies by the end of this year. So they have 2020 to come up with them, but the law is in effect now.
I would suggest we go ahead and approve, but that you're welcome to put this on the agenda to discuss the update in the law if you think it's an appropriate conversation to have here. That's correct, isn't it? She could, just because we let this move forward, so it's in the Lexipol process, and the bulletin will potentially capture it for the update with the law. That doesn't prevent you from participating in a meaningful way, putting it on our agenda for discussion, if you think that's.
That, or I think you could also we could just put a question to the chief for the next chief's report, and the chief's questions about what their plan is for
implementing changes that are consistent with the penal code.
Because if I just brought it, I would just say the same thing I just said, if it was on the agenda again, so I think it would make more sense to see what the chief says, and if he would be interested in accepting the assistance of this outside entity that I know has expertise in it.
So how about if we accept this now for this year and ask to, because the department doesn't come up with their own policy, they have to come up by the end of next year, right? By the end of 2020, yeah. And ask to then review what they come up with at that time. Okay, because this is good for this year.
Well, I did
Well, the
find,
law started in January, so they're
But
working on it now.
they're still in compliance, because they
But they're
have.
in compliance until the end of this
Yeah.
year.
On the other hand, this is a really important issue, and as far as, it would be great to have the appropriate training and
Right.
alerting the officers that in the case of domestic violence, you ought to consider
Right.
pursuing this order, sooner rather than later, it's,
Right,
so.
yeah.
I would hate to postpone it till the end of next year.
Well, could we task you with writing a memo
Sure.
that would be forwarded via Ms. Reed?
I think
No,
you're
she
now sort of
Yeah, we're going off
running
on- yeah,
afoul
we're
of the
going
Brown
to-
Act.
yeah.
You haven't agendized.
Yeah, and it's not on the agenda, so I would suggest that, we let, our PRC officer, speak with the chief, because all we would need is a follow-up, in my opinion, waiting on an update, because let's suppose we have a subcommittee that works on this, and I'm sure that you'll see this update come through, so I don't see why we couldn't vote on it now.
We might not.
If we
We just
accept this now, we're not gonna see an update on it, unless
I
we
would-
require it.
Right.
Well, we can ask, Ms. Lee to
So
I-
the,
send
can
a, yeah, you
request
can make,
that we-
yeah, you can request, yeah.
And if you really feel we need a report, you can always agendize it, you can say, policy, selectable number, policy, whatever, we think we
You
should
say
change.
you wanna do a follow-up on it, and, yeah.
Just as a general policy matter, not as even a matter of law, that we think it's appropriate to have this in place. I mean, even if there wasn't the penal code section requirement, we could still request it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, there was one other section that kind of caught my eye that I thought was not quite right, but, I mean, it's not that crucial if this is gonna be revisited. If there's some sense that we should go ahead and approve this tonight.
What was your other issue?
On page 861, the first full paragraph says the officer should also inform the restraining person that he or she is required within 24 hours to surrender to a law enforcement agency any other firearms and ammunition he or she owns, blah, 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 or sell them to a firearms dealer. But again, I looked at the statute today, and the way that works is that they only, that only comes up if the officer did not request that the firearms be relinquished at the time that the order was served. And so state law just this doesn't really track state law, this provision here.
So why don't we not act on this, and we'll ask that question and the question about the update this year. Will Lexipol provide a bulletin that brings the policy into compliance by the end of the year? Those two questions. Do you want that to come back here, or we can send it to the subcommittee and we'll talk about it there? Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so
To the
let's,
subcommittee.
let's do a motion.
Okay, so I'll move that we refer 341 back to the subcommittee with two questions for the chief.
Sorry, it's 343.
343.
Sorry, yes. Two questions for the chief. Number one is process for the update under the new state law. Will there be a Lexipol bulletin update? And the second is this detailed question about how guns are, can you say it succinctly for us?
You could say, section 343.4. It's in 343.4, service of gun violence restraining orders, regarding, it's not being very concise. The requirement that the officer inform the restrained person that he or she is required within 24 hours, and then just track that language. You see that language? Kathy, what I'm talking about?
Yes, but you said, okay, the requirement that the officer
Also inform the restrained person.
also inform the restrained
Yeah.
person. Okay, the concern is whether that appropriately tracks
The state
penal-
law.
State law, okay. You did mention the penal code section, what was that?
343.4.
No, the penal code.
Oh, the penal code.
18-108, is that 18108?
Well, it's in a couple of places, but 18120. Maybe that's the main place that I saw. I thought I saw it someplace else, but.
We'll just stick with one, two.
Yeah.
Okay.
18120?
Is that the new provision in the penal code? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. And that's effective now.
You want them to have a full year, essentially.
Well, this is not that, those provisions related to training and, you know, what should be highlighted for officers. This is more procedural about if you serve a gun violence restraining order, the officer's supposed to advise the person to give up their guns right then and there. But if the officer isn't the one serving it, or if the officer doesn't make that request, then the person's supposed to be told they've got 24 hours. So there's kind of this alternate thing, but the way this policy is written doesn't quite track the state law, which is a little complicated, which is probably why it doesn't track it completely. Okay.
There's a motion. There's a motion. I thought there was a motion.
Is there, can I ask just one question? I'm sorry, Lily. You said it's 18120, and it's, I guess it was it amended or?
18120 B2. Okay, sentence alternatively, if no request is made.
Okay, Ramsey, did you find it?
I did find it. You said, just so I understand, you said it's, which section are you saying is to directing the police to do something?
In 343.1, on page 861,
You know, I have that, but in the, I'm okay. If we're just given the crosswalk between the sections.
sorry,
Where in the penal code?
18120 B2.
Little b2,
Yeah. About halfway down, alternatively, if no request is made.
I'm not seeing it, sorry.
I just printed this out today, that's what I was thinking.
time,
Yeah.
why don't we
Can we
just
move on?
take that, the subcommittee and we'll revisit it?
That's
those
fine.
two questions.
Yeah.
And I don't think we need to vote on that, we
Okay.
just do it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to 344, off-duty law enforcement action. Is there any concerns about that one? I have a concern.
Go ahead.
Well, my concern is under 344.3, firearms, and it's the second paragraph, and I just have a problem with this. It says, firearms shall not be carried by any officer who has consumed an amount of an alcoholic beverage. My concern is, what do they consider an amount? Is it 1 drink, 2 drinks, 10 drinks? Because
We had a lot of
Drinking.
discussion about this.
yeah, drinking, I mean, you can, some people might have 1 drink and they're stoned.
It says here.
I mean, I just need to know,
Right.
because it's so broad, and it's
Yes.
concerning.
I think the way it was written is if you keep reading, it says
That could
that
adversely
could
affect.
adversely affect the officer's senses or judgment.
But that doesn't tell me anything. If you have 1 drink, that might affect
We
me.
had a
If I
lot
had
of
1 drink,
discussion.
it would affect me because I don't drink.
Exactly.
So I don't know. It seemed like it should be something in this policy that states 1 drink, 2 drinks. I mean, what
Yeah,
are
we
we
talked
saying?
about this.
This
We're-
is like open end. I can
That's
sit
right.
there and drink, and maybe,
A
you know,
120-pound officer is different than
Yeah.
a 320-pound officer. So
Right. It's
that's why
concerning.
we were satisfied to say that it was any amount that could adversely affect senses or judgment. So please,
Kind of leaving it up to
Officers-
the officer, I guess, to know what will
And
affect them.
that's just it.
well, what are you gonna do? Set a
Well,
blood
I don't
alcohol
know.
level or,
Well,
you know?
I don't know.
It's,
I don't know.
there,
If anyone has a
Are we
great
talking about
idea.
officers on duty?
no.
This is
No.
off.
It's off duty, but they have their. It's like they're off duty, they're off duty, but it's about firearms. You're off duty, you're off
Okay,
firearms.
I'm sorry, I should read it. Yeah.
Don't drink and drive.
Don't drink and serve.
Well, maybe the more important point is, if I'm off duty and I'm going into a bar, I'm carrying my firearm in, and maybe it was okay then, but then I'm sitting there and I've had 5 drinks.
Exactly, it's not okay.
So it's kind of the timeline, because what are you supposed to do with your firearm?
So
Right.
Because they're saying who has concerns, okay, so I hadn't consumed it when I walked in here, now I have, what am I supposed to do with it, give it to the bar?
you're supposed to be a mature person
And not drink.
who
I would think.
But-
makes a
Yeah, I'm
conscious
not
decision, and the policy is, if you can be adversely affected by what you're consuming, then you need to not be doing that. So, that's a strict
Yeah.
standard, if you can be adversely affected by what you're ingesting or smoking or whatever, you need to not be doing that, or you need to not be carrying your firearm.
Right.
So we were satisfied, we had a lot of discussion about this.
So code captures that aspect of this.
Yes, if you could, you don't even have to be drunk, it's just possible that you could be adversely affected.
Absolutely.
So,
You know, we were
Help me
coming
out
out
with
as
you.
strict as,
Yes,
we were
no,
trying
I
to come
think
up with the
this is
strictest
good.
standard as we could.
I think it's fine.
So,
You don't go into the bar with your firearm.
Well, I would think you
and then
wouldn't.
consume 5 drinks.
I would think you
Yeah.
shouldn't. That was my only concern right there.
and I understand, because we spent time on it, because it is an
Yeah.
issue of concern.
Okay, anyone else?
Was that their only issue?
Do you?
Well, I just had one, it's on page 865,
Okay,
section 344.4.1, intervention procedure,
okay.
the second paragraph.
I'm sorry, you're going real quick, 865.
Page 865, section 344.4.1, intervention procedure. In the second paragraph, whenever practicable, the officer should loudly and repeatedly identify him herself as a police officer until acknowledged. And I think I had raised this before too, because to me this it's vague because it doesn't say acknowledged by whom or how. And also, it seems burdensome on an officer because if he or she is running into a scary situation and saying, Berkeley police officer, I'm a police officer, and then looking around to see if they're acknowledged. Someone's hiding under a desk, have they acknowledged it? So I just feel like the until acknowledged language should be deleted, unless it's something that the police department thinks is
Yeah, I mean,
important.
I would say the police said that it was okay, and to me, that's just sort of an operational thing. If they're okay with it.
I guess
we're not gonna
Yeah.
take- I mean,
To me,
Superintendent.
the concern in my mind is, I want it, until I'm acknowledged by the uniformed police that show up, that I'm a cop, I'm gonna be identifying myself, because I don't wanna get shot.
Oh, you're saying
Right.
acknowledged by.
That's how I take
by
it.
the
If
police.
I'm pointing a gun at somebody trying to detain them, and a uniformed officer shows up and doesn't know me, I might get shot by him, so I'm gonna be
Right.
wanting
Right.
everyone to know I'm a cop, and then once the uniform gets there, then I can get rid of my gun, and
Okay, I thought.
that's how I take it.
I read it acknowledgement by someone in the public. So if it's acknowledgement by an officer arriving on the scene, that's different. And I guess I see these things also, if we have these policies, and if something bad happens and a member of the public sues and says, well, your own policy says you should have kept identifying yourself until acknowledged, and you didn't do that. So I don't want us to approve of policies, even if the police department thinks they're okay, if maybe there's some problematic language. And again, I wasn't viewing this language the way that you were viewing it.
This is a
And they-
Lexipol policy, right?
Yeah.
And the purpose of Lexipol is to provide immunity against lawsuits. One major purpose. So this is written by Lexipol, I assume.
Well, I guess, I still don't, it still seems vague to me.
Well, that's
They also have
because
the official identification on it.
we
That's
go,
gonna be displayed.
we go through this conversation in the subcommittee because the number of types of situations they're going to encounter is innumerable.
Mhm.
So, if an officer, out of uniform, is in a room with a gun, there's a situation happening, then everybody there needs to know that's an officer, or else somebody else who's got a
Yeah.
gun could shoot them. So
Right.
this is just saying,
Protection.
keep identifying yourself as long as it's necessary to keep identifying yourself. So you're not gonna be able to predict who's gonna be doing the acknowledgement, or what the situation is gonna be, and we're not gonna be able to write policies that address all this. This job requires discretion, constant discretion. And what we try to do is provide principles that help them do that well and that protect everybody's interests. And this does that. When practicable, repeatedly identify yourself as an officer until acknowledged by whoever needs to understand that you're an officer. It could be a child who's being abducted and you're identifying yourself as a police officer. It could be the uniformed officer who shows up on scene and doesn't know you. It could be, who knows? That's what this job is. It's
But how's a child gonna acknowledge it? I guess what was throwing me was just how is that acknowledgement
You're not
expressed?
gonna be able to predict that. The number of situations, let's start writing out how it should be acknowledged, and we'll be on page
No, I was
320.
recommending that those words be deleted because to me they were vague, but it's,
It's a strong principle that an officer out of uniform should be acknowledged until they're reasonably assured that the people present understand that they're a police officer. That's what this is trying to achieve. And everybody deserves to know who's a police officer and who isn't.
Okay, are there any other concerns? Do we have any other? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I move we accept this.
Second?
Second.
It's been moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Opposed? Seeing none, Motion carried, so we're accepting 344.
420. No, sorry.
No, 344.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, our next item is 420, foot pursuits. Are there any concerns about foot pursuits? Do we have any concerns? Seeing none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, motion carried. We're accepting 420 foot pursuits. The next lexical item is 424, mobile data terminal use. Are there any concerns?
I didn't have a concern, I just had a question, because I'm not familiar with this technology, so I'm just wondering if someone from the police department could just give a little background about this. What they are, what they're used for.
Well, I actually haven't read this policy yet, but.
Just the mobile data
Those are computer
terminal.
systems in our vehicles that we get our calls for service on, we can write reports on, we run license plates, people. So it's typically the computer that's next to the driver in the car that you see in the police car that's right about here.
And when you run people on it, what information comes up?
If I'm running an individual, it would typically give me a driver's license if they have one in California. It would give local hits of any contacts here in our police department.
What kind of hits?
Local contacts, if they've had local in our record system. It would give if they're on any kind of local probation or parole, or it should if it's in the system. What else am I missing?
Warrants.
Warrants.
They're wanted.
Yeah.
But all of that's just local,
Mm.
not statewide?
It's stuff that's in NCIC.
Okay, so
Could
you
be
said
national.
local hits.
In addition,
Sometimes probations and paroles that aren't local won't come up.
we'll put it right line to clarify this. So, you've got warrants, probation, parole, you're just accessing the NCIC, National Crime, whatever they call it, which is a national system, which is basically a national network of a database of warrants in people's criminal history nationwide. And then you guys also access the CLEP system, which is the state system, right? And then in addition to that national database and state database, it sounds like the Berkeley Police Department has its own database or information about local contacts. So in addition to that, you have that database.
Correct.
And that's all comes through the NDT.
Correct.
Okay, any other questions?
So I mean, there's some possibility that a national database or some other database, somehow didn't get uploaded due to human error or whatever, but you have access to those three databases.
Okay.
We understand. Okay, is there any other questions, concerns? Seeing none, I would like a motion.
I move we accept this,
Second.
It's been moved in second. All in favor?
424.
For 424, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. The next lexical item is 428, First Amendment Assembly.
Well, I have some background on this. This was sent back to the subcommittee a while ago, and we were trying to figure out why, and then we realized it was just a specific commissioner had a concern about it. But this is a policy, well, it came from C-64, and C-64 got vetted by a subcommittee of this commission following the December 2014 protests. The subcommittee said we should just send it back. The subcommittee has no problem with it and sending it back.
Okay, so the subcommittee approved it. Are there any concerns about this? Has everyone read it? No concerns?
So there were no concerns in the subcommittee?
I wasn't on it when this went through, I don't.
Randy,
No, I don't.
subcommittee approved it?
Yes.
Any concerns? Hearing none, seeing none, I would like a motion.
Move.
Second,
A second.
it has been moved and second that, we accept 428 First Amendment Assembly, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carried. Let's pull item 506, disabled vehicles. Are there any concerns, discussions on this item? Any concerns? No? Okay, I would like a motion. Any second?
Second.
It has been moved in second that we accept 506 disabled vehicles. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none? Motion carried. Let's oppose 1202. Second response. Excuse me, 1202, second response. Has everyone read it? Are there any concerns? No? No concern?
Chair, if I may,
Yes.
just remind the commissioners that this is one that they had seen before, they had a lot of issues with it. And, so it was substantially revised to
Okay.
address those concerns, and the subcommittee felt.
Okay. I'd like a motion.
Would somebody on the subcommittee tell us how this was revised in response to concerns? Who, were you on that subcommittee at the time? Oh, I see, George isn't here, so it's.
I remember I had some concerns, because there was reference to Exhibit A and Exhibit B, and that was kind of confusing, so it looks to me like a lot of the changes were addressing that ambiguity in the original.
Okay. So, are there any concerns? Anyone happy? Okay, is there a motion?
Second.
It's been moved and second that we accept 1202. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carried to accept 1202.
Yeah,
Some of these.
Let's see.
I think I was there when it got revised.
Okay,
It wasn't there.
next item on the agenda, public comment. Okay.
So I would like to apologize because I was late, something happened, I got confused about the address. I would like to make a very simple comment. My experience with the Berkeley police, it has always been very good, excellent. But the problem is many times when you call the police, and even if you see people dealing with drugs in the street, they say, well, this is not a crime. We can't write a report. That has happened to me. Also, when people are harassing you or smoking marijuana inside the house and it's the marijuana everywhere, they say, oh, marijuana is legal. No, this is zero. So where I suggest is for the police to get some information about the ordinance, some ordinance, like the ordinance, the no smoking ordinance passed in May, I believe it's 14, I'm not sure the exact date, May 2014, prohibits smoking marijuana and tobacco in the multi-unit residence, inside the unit, outside the unit. So, you know, it's very important, particularly I had having these issues with my neighbor downstairs, to have some proof. You know, the police is called, they having a party that is smoking marijuana, tobacco, burning incense, and other chemicals. If the police come and write, you know, and give a report number, you know, so it's very important. So that's the comment I just need to make. I think the use of drugs is overlooked. The police department, they used to have a narcotics section, so I would really like that section to come back. The police officers say always very politely that they don't have enough personnel. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment? Charles? Okay.
Commissioners, my name is Charles Clark from District 6, and on the commendations policy, I'd like to put in a good word for exemplary, not because it has a better place in the scale of awesomeness relative to extraordinary, but because it would give you a clue as to the reason for the PRC specifically to be commending police officers, namely that you're identifying an example of the sort of conduct that you, the commission, wish to see from our police department. I offer this positive remark for the word exemplary to help you when you're developing your criteria. I think that's what you should be aiming for. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Seeing none? We will be going into closed session. And we thank you for coming out tonight and hope to see you at our next meeting.